Can you hear me? Okay. Do we want to test everyone's mic once since this is new?
Okay.
All right.
Okay, how about me? Good? Yeah.
Eric?
Blue skies shining on me, nothing but blue sky.
Testing. Yeah.
I think it works, yes.
Okay. So, obviously we are shifting gears somewhat. So we're going to try to stick a little more tightly to the agenda. So we'll start with the call to order. Roz, is that just... I just say hello. Okay. And then our first item is the approval of minutes. So we've got both November and December. So why don't we start with the November 14th, 2017 minutes. I guess first, does anyone have any comments or like to motion to approve?
Yeah, I motion to approve.
Great.
All in favor?
I'll second that motion.
Yeah. Are you good with them, Lorraine?
Yeah.
Great. Okay, so we've got a second.
Yeah.
Oh, here, hold on. Let me. All right, hit your button, then you can second
I'll
the mic.
second that motion.
Oh, try it again. Just press it down once, and now let me.
Motion is seconded.
We're not there yet. Oh, because I haven't turned off William. Okay. I'm getting all your full names too. All right, and try that again.
I'll second that motion, Lucy.
I don't know why we're having so much trouble. We'll get this. We'll get this. All right, you're requesting it. No one else is on. Now you can speak. You don't need to press a button.
I'll second that motion, Lucy.
Perfect. I just turned it off for you. I'll let you all turn off your mics. I don't need to. Okay, so then all in favor?
Aye.
All right.
Do we need the mic on to say aye? Or to be recorded? Okay.
I mean, you also.
It's an audio and a visual recording, right?
I don't, yeah.
Okay.
If you'll edit
I know,
out
right?
all of this stuff, it will work really well. You're going to make us look good.
All right, after the makeup session.
Right.
Okay, December. Any concerns? Otherwise, would someone like to motion to approve? Let's see.
Motion to approve?
All right, any second?
I'll second that motion. I'll second that motion.
Great. All right, all in favor?
Aye.
All right. Like a well-oiled machine. Okay, so next on our agenda is a spot to note for the future for public comments. We don't have a public at the moment. Unless
This is your time.
Rob has any input. But for future reference, should there be, this is now the slot where we'll have that taken care of. And it's, as you see on the agenda, split voting items and public comments. So now on to our project review.
Oh, I have a question.
Yes, what's that? Let me go for it.
Okay, there are two kind of public comments here. One is based on project reviews, and I think the ones that are people who are here commenting on project reviews should go after the project review is discussed. I mean, that's how the HPC does it. So the applicant explains what they're doing, and then if someone is here to speak on that, then they come up. And so I just want to make a note of that. I think that makes more sense to arrange that.
Is there, I mean, that logically makes sense to me. Is there a reason for the current order? Do we need to?
So you'll have
Oh, sorry. Your blinking made me think you were working. All right. There.
We are following the city council style of doing this on this. So we'll have public comments at the beginning. And I think that will, generally, we may not have a lot, but if we have a lot, I think that will keep the meeting moving forward. And then there's an opportunity for the board to hear all of that and absorb it before the review happens. But the review discussion is just among board members. It's not a give and take. It's not actually, it's among board members and the applicant, not with the general public.
And there's still an opportunity for them to submit anything by
Yes,
writing,
they
should
can.
it be, obviously, again, not something we often deal with, but should there be something
Yeah.
where folks feel strongly?
Yes.
Since we don't have one, why don't we leave it as is, and then we can test when we do have a public comment, we can try it this way, and if it really seems to do a disservice to the process, we can change our approach. Here, Lorraine, let me
Yeah.
switch you back on.
Thank you. I just, it's just if there's, this is a very simple project. But in a complicated project, if a person isn't hearing the issues, they may realize something that they're concerned about that they didn't know about to tell us. And that's the part that I'm concerned about. I mean, because we're dealing with a project, and would we be able to ask the public, do you want to add any comments, based on what you've heard, before we start to deliberate? I just want to make sure that somebody's not sitting out there finding out in a complicated project and finding out something that they're very concerned about and haven't been able to convey it to us. That's all. And is there a way that we can, I don't know that the city council way of doing it for this kind of thing fits what, a project
So we've got,
needs.
Willie
So-
has,
yeah.
let me give him a chance to weigh in. I'll turn you off. There we go.
Okay, actually, I heard both. So, and I somewhat agree with Lorraine after thinking about it, because I started to agree with you. But because Old Georgetown Board, all the review boards, because it has pictures, they're somewhat more complicated, it's new information. It's a little different than the city where they're dealing with a law or issue. So I would tend to think people would want to understand what's being asked first, and it's a narrative often in pictures, and then deliver on it. So it's just a suggestion.
Well, we don't have one tonight, so I guess if we wanted to change the order, is it just a matter, do we need to vote, or is it just a matter of requesting the change, Roz, for process?
I'll check on that. I think we would have to vote to change the agenda.
Okay, well, why don't, since we don't have one tonight, let's hold on it. The comments make sense. We'll review next time. So yeah, I guess if that could be on the agenda, that would be great. Okay, so then the project review. Okay, you're all set.
Okay. My name is John Mangan with Mangan Group Architects. We occupy the second floor of a building at 7034 Carroll Avenue. We are hoping to put a job sign or a sign in front of the building so that people know we're there. We've been there since 2005, and people usually tell me they don't know we're there. So we've given the exhibit that's on the screen right now as one of several exhibits that will be part of our historic area work application. I think the two photographic exhibits might describe most clearly to people what it is we intend to do. The tenant at the lower level is Amano. We plan on mimicking in style, maybe not as literally as the photograph, but in mimicking the style of the Amano sign. The view that's on the screen right now is looking at the, let's see, that's south, so north. So that would be the east side, looking west. That side of the sign, we have it would be a plastic insert that would be changed on probably a monthly basis that would mimic information we had on a blog. The idea is it's sort of a town posting on something that had to do with primarily residential architecture, and it would be updated so that people at Roscoe's that might be waiting in line would have something interactive to discuss around the architecture. And then on the other side of the sign would be our standard logo for our branding that would be there. That would also probably be made by a sign company, so it would probably be some type of a plastic insert into a wood frame, and it would be quite similar to the Amano sign other than that. So that's the extent of the project. Oh, yes, I had neglected to have that exhibit originally, and Roz Grigsby had asked me to produce that. So those are the actual dimensions. There'll be a small pier concrete footing under each of the posts. Those will be pressure treated and painted wood posts with a wood frame that the plastic sign then would insert into. And that's
Great. Okay, any comments, questions?
I'm happy to go back to the other photos if you want to see something.
Yeah, oh, let's see, we got Eric. Eric.
John, when you said the people waiting at Roscoe's or eating at Roscoe's, they had interactive, what kind of things would you put on there?
we're trying to...
Oh, hold on, sorry. There we go.
Okay. We're trying in a broader marketing strategy to make proper use of an informational blog that we're trying to develop on architectural issues. So for instance, might be windows, architectural windows consideration that you would have if you were putting windows in a renovation on a house or some such thing. Mm-hmm. So it would basically be a graphic compilation of that specific blog post that had to do with architecture in general that would be related there.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, let me switch over. Willie.
Okay. My own comment was that on other sign applications, sorry, there was a lot of language in some of those signs, and what we had asked them to do, that to pare down the language because it was just to announce their business, and it wasn't to advertise. It's the difference between a billboard and an advertisement than it is to announce one's place of business. So because we've ruled in the past on keeping it to just the announcement of the business, that the other information would not be in keeping with it. So, I mean, example was the, what was it, the real estate company?
Right.
Right.
I'm forgetting the name now, but
No,
right, Long and Foster had
Long
a
and Foster came before.
similar-
They had
somewhat similar sign, not the same.
similar
premise.
with a lot of promotional information that they use in their promotion of their business. And then the board thought it would have been more appropriate just to, which they wanted the same thing. They said, we're now in this house, we want to know that we are so people can actually find us. And so that was, we said, fine, then we can put the sign up to satisfy that goal, but the clutterness of the sign that they presented, we asked them to simplify it, and that's what they did. So I just want to make sure that if we approve anything, that's still in keeping with something that we made comments on previous signs that
Right.
that's similar to the way we treat all the signs within.
Yeah, that makes
That's all.
sense to me as a concern that lines up with things we've talked about in the past. I guess this sign seems somewhat different in that we're talking about a front and a back. In some of the contexts, we've only had a single side where it was a single sign, a single place for information. So I think one thing that we could discuss is, does the fact that it's a back end, if it's a back, is that different? Is our expectation that if it's out as a sign, then it's a sign and needs to only be a sign? That seems like the issue. All right, Willie, I'll
Because when we
back
did
on.
talk about it, was about content. It wasn't about the sign, front or back. That discussion was only about content. So the content was.
But it was about content on the sign. And so I'm pointing out the potential for a distinction that if we're talking about a sign having a front, like this sign has a front and a back, we may say it doesn't have a back because it's a sign that you're seeing from both sides, in which case, if we want to hold to that, signs need to be signs only. That would be the request.
It's in a public space. So if a sign's in a public space, regardless of it has one side, two sides, or four sides, or whatever the nature of the sign, it doesn't matter. It still follows the same criteria under which signs are approved. And it's the same language applies to one side as it does the other side.
Okay, let me see. We've got Eric, and then I'll turn back to you, John.
I was first, too.
Yeah, I saw you.
Let me ask our board, can Amano say 20% off all sandals this week on their sign?
Let's see. Willie, and then
Yeah,
we'll move on
okay,
to John.
that's a temporary sign. So yeah, they're entitled, all businesses are entitled to put up a temporary sign. So
But
if-
and so to some extent, these are temporary. Like these are a series of temporary signs. He's requesting a place
Okay,
to.
well, if
put
that's
them.
the way, okay, maybe that's,
So let me
okay.
turn
Then
to
back
John.
up.
Okay, so Willie, I'm gonna turn yours off, and all right, John, you should be all set. Oh, let me try that again. Now you should be set.
I'm red. My button is red. Is that correct?
Yes,
Okay.
you're good now.
Okay,
Thank
very
you.
good. No, I'm completely empathetic to the point Willie's making. If I were on the other side of this issue, if someone else had a sign that had the liberty to change itself without any type of an approvals process and become visually noisy or something that was objectionable by the community and somehow managed to circumvent the approvals process by having a portion of it that would change out. So I guess the thought here was some of the young creative minds in the office liked the idea of, on the front of Roscoe's, the city had this poetry signage that would go out. And I don't know, I understand and I appreciate the objective of that. I don't know how it's regulated from an aesthetics standpoint, that if the poetry were changed out, if it would have to go through an approval where it could potentially be objectionable. And I feel we may be a little bit in that kind of gray area here where we're trying to do something instructional. I would be disingenuous if I said that it was being instructional in a way that if you felt it benefited you, you would think well of our firm and possibly use our firm, but it wouldn't be overt advertising. I'm not an attorney, so I don't know that. I'm quite happy to have the stasis of a mirrored sign that's simply the image of our logo as a place of business, which I think is probably the primary function of the sign. But I'm open to suggestions in terms of how to regulate changing information on that. But go ahead.
All right, Willie.
yeah. Well, if the board can rule on whether, if it is a placeholder for, as you pointed out, they're selling shoes today. Yeah, we just got to be careful, that's all, about creating or approving signs that are, you could, it could be a sign that constantly changes, but it's not in keeping.
Let me switch it over to Roz, and then I'll turn to you, Eric.
I just wondered if it would be helpful to think of it as almost a billboard. A bulletin board. That on the one side, it's a permanent sign for the business at that location, and on the other side, it operates almost like a bulletin board of changing information.
So then we would just be deciding, are we approving a bulletin board? Sort of decoupling it from the sign-specific question on that side. So Eric, let me turn to you. All right.
No, in my thinking, it's, if we approve the sign, we're approving the structure that's out there now and how it works with the streetscape. But do we also sit in judgment of what they put within their signpost? We do. So therefore, my question again, I don't know that I got an answer. can Amano say, this week, 25% off? Or is that not conducive to what we're here for?
Let me turn to Willie. Okay.
Amanos can do that independent of their building sign.
No, I mean-
Ace Hardware does it all the time. They hang a banner in front
No,
of their.
no, Willie, I'm talking about.
Okay, hold on
right
just a
across
sec.
Right across their Amano sign, this week, 25% off.
It's like if they were to place something over
Yeah.
it. I think that's where if it would be a temporary capacity because they're not constructing something. It's not a.
Right.
If it's, I think also I'm not sure if they repainted it. Does that?
No,
I don't
no,
know what point it comes before us, and I don't know that we need to decide that exactly. I understand your
Well, I
your
mean,
point, but
If John wants to put up the sign of his business, that we should vote on. What he does with the sign, if that's in our Ballywick to-do, I mean, it's a sales thing. You know it's a sales thing. It has to be.
I guess I think I'm comfortable going with we review the sign as a sign on the one side, and then we review the structure as its compatibility with the area, and
Right.
start with the bulletin board, see if we're have a consensus that that's an acceptable approach. I'd like to start with that. If folks object, we can move to something else.
Yeah.
Okay,
That's all
so
right.
I'll motion to approve the sign with the changeable back as proposed. Do we have a second? Oh, let's see. Oh, you're not. There we go. Lorraine. All right.
Yep.
All right, so Lorraine seconds. All in favor?
All right.
Great. And I see. Okay, so Roz, you're now. So there's not language specific to this. You're just noting the approval. Sorry, you're answering questions and typing at the same time.
Changeable back. Is that right? That captures what you voted on.
Changeable is spelled correctly, yes.
Maybe just saying complying with the temporary sign requirement. Yeah, I mean, they're, yeah,
I think we
Montgomery
just.
County does have these signs are actually governed by Montgomery County. We just happen to approve them, and then they have their own
Right.
requirements. And
Right,
one of
so
their
they
own
may have
requirements
different
is for
feelings.
temporary signs, and so as long
I
as
guess
you
I would
abide by
like to say
then
that
you're
we're approving the proposal and leave it at that, so that
Yeah.
we're not weighing in on. I mean, the discussion was important, but I don't think we need to specify what we're approving since it's the condition that was presented to us. Yes, great.
But it's not a temporary sign.
So it's, what we'll have is just that it was the proposal as presented, which was to have signage on one side and the changeable side on the other, without specifics about what goes in there. Lorraine seconded. Okay. So we're finished with project reviews. John, thank you for cooperating with our new format and putting up with our delays.
You were the canary, John.
I will send you a letter tomorrow. John, I'll send you a letter tomorrow from HPC.
Well, thank you very much. Well, this is a great thing.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so for future reference, should there be design consultations, we would hear them after the project reviews. We don't have any today. So we'll move on to old business, which includes board vacancies and the FAB code. So let's start with the vacancies. And Roz, I'll switch over to you. Okay?
I have had this on the agenda, I think, every meeting since the end of March when the terms end and roll over. The spot that's open is for a business owner or commercial property owner. And so I just encourage the board to think about who might be good candidates and either to talk with them or let me know and I'll reach out. But we do want to get that position filled.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, hold on, let me turn Roz off. Lorraine.
How many spots do we have, Roz? One? One vacancy. Okay.
Okay, so we'll think about it and come back to that next time. So then we've got the FAB code. Let's see, Roz, did you have updates on that? And I believe Lorraine had a question or two, so I'll start with you, Roz.
I put it on the agenda just to alert people that it is on council's agenda for a work session, January 24th, and then a voting session February 7th, I believe, and February 14th, I think. So we have seen that many times, and the November meeting, I believe, is when the board thought it was ready to go.
Okay, and let's see, Lorraine, did you have a question or comment? Okay, you're all set.
Yes, I did. I actually learned something about those regulations under 8.4, and I learned that the city does enforce them, and this is based on issues I'm aware of in neighborhoods that are at the interface between commercial residential properties, and there's certain aspects of that proximity that is of a concern. Lighting, for example, is one of them. And what I learned from speaking with Rick, I can't remember, I can't pronounce his last name, but Dwayne, yes, and who was wonderfully helpful. At any rate, he explained that there was a provision, there are provisions in there that they do use, and that in particular, one of the concerns has been the shielding of lights, from commercial areas into residential. And he immediately zeroed in on that. And
So can I ask who you're referencing? I know you said you didn't know them exactly, but context, who is he? So
he's the manager of code enforcement for the city,
Okay,
I
thank
understand. Yeah, sorry. And so I thought it would be helpful to actually maybe even talk with him a little bit, if we could invite him to chat with us and how the city does code enforcement and how some of these regulations might be important. So I realize that I'm a little concerned about just eliminating them without further thought as to where they may be beneficial in other ways. And I just wanted to bring that up because I had never realized that they are considered something that is regulated by the city, by the code enforcement folks there.
Okay, here, let me
yeah.
switch to Roz, because I would like to hear kind of how that
Yeah.
aligns with our discussion before this. Oh, let's see. All right, Roz.
Yeah, so as you recall, the board's been looking at code changes since 2013 for exactly this chapter 8.4, and then moving it over and systematizing with the other chapter 2.16, I believe, where the other council-appointed committees are located. And we have had many, many discussions on how to look at the very detailed part of chapter 8.4 that includes lighting and roofs and all kinds of specific information. The biggest issue is that it is not in agreement with the county code on all points, and the county code provides the guidance that is used. And Lorraine, you yourself talked about that when, for a particularly difficult project, that the county, you felt did the right thing relying on the county code to address it. That in fact, that is the backup. What we have right now is actually a problem because the two don't align. And in not aligning, there are things that either fall through the cracks or business owners or commercial property owners can get kind of misguided information or conflicting information. Our objective was to be current. The code hasn't been updated for many years in terms of the details in those specifics, and to align with the county code.
Okay, let's see. Lorraine.
Yeah, maybe there's a way, Roz. And this was news to me that the city was could use them, and in certain cases, they have been very useful. The county has great, I mean, these have been around for, 20 years, and so the county has been able to work with them, and, perhaps even talking with county HPC, we might want to do a little bit of that on this, but I think that the county does not seem to have a problem with, for example, it will say things we've worried about, windows that, vinyl windows may be used, and that's true, but they may not be approved. I mean, they could be a potential, that was one, and that doesn't concern the county because they know how to review those things. Yes, in certain cases, a replacement window is needed. In other cases, it's not allowed. So they've been able to navigate around a lot of these things, and I wonder if we should have a bit of a conversation with them as well. I recognize your concern with this, but here we had a situation where the solution was like right there for a particular light shielding issue, and how do we sift what's the useful parts of this and perhaps discard or modify? Would modifying some of them be okay? It's just a question I had because I had no idea that they were still being used.
Let me switch back to Roz. Okay.
Certainly the board can choose to modify if they want to. The difficulty that comes with that is keeping it updated and current and making sure that with each modification that the county does, that it aligns with the cities, and with each modification the city does, it aligns with the county. I have to say, we've been talking about this for almost 5 years, for 4.5 years. And the last 6 months of working on this, it seemed like the board found common ground on this and agreed with it. So I'm, it's the board's decision.
Let's see, Eric, hold on just a sec. I'll turn to you. There we go.
I just want to voice my, my whole world is lighting. That's all I do is lighting. Light pollution is very in the news, but I don't know that it was in the news 5 years ago. 40 years ago, the law simply stated there can be no sign in a store that says stop here for savings, because stop is a traffic-oriented word. You couldn't have a sign that was flashing or appeared to be flashing. I wasn't allowed to put a mirror ball in my window because it flashed lights. All of that's been down the tubes now. I mean, you see flashing lights everywhere. So the consistency of what was then and versus now, now all of a sudden we're realizing that we're putting too much light up into the atmosphere. The fact that you can't see stars when you walk outside is because of the light pollution from DC. All parking lots now, they have to have the proportion of light coming down versus the proportion going up. So when we're talking about something that predates and is currently changing, when I sell LED lights, I tell the customer every 6 months is going to be a nuance. So you can put them all in your house, but 6 months from now there'll be something new. So yeah, I understand the difference between the county versus the city, but it would be fine with me if the city said, okay, let's do it the best way we could do it now, which probably won't coordinate with the county.
So let me turn it over to Willie. All right. Willie?
Okay. Well, unless the board, so you're concerned about the language that's in this code, that it's language that supports the Facade Advisory Board's agenda, right? But we have no approving authority. You don't come to us for a building permit. You don't come to us to approve to put up a sign. You come to us as an advisory board. We provide our opinions. Those opinions are then viewed and taken into consideration when it goes to someone who actually makes the decision. So the laws and all that should be with them and them defining. And I agree that, but what we haven't as Takoma Park and what we've defined as something contributing or non-contributing to our community, we self-define that, and we have the journal or
The
whatever.
amendment to
The
the
amendment, right.
master plan,
So,
is that the?
in some
document?
sense, as long as it's very clear as how we view and judge things that come before this board, and there's additional onerous requirements that the county places. And quite frankly, there's international codes that also apply. So I think everybody should have their own, and we would focus on what we value as in our community, which is the amendment. And so I wouldn't have a problem with it being separate, because in some sense, if we pretend that we're approving and the language gets confusing, I don't think that's helpful.
Yeah, I continue to feel that it is more a disservice to have code that conflicts or is phrased differently enough that it leads to confusion with the county. And the fact is, Willie was pointing out, like, it's ultimately the county that makes a final decision because they are the ones with the enforcement power when it comes to building permits. We certainly have an input, but when it comes to any sort of enforceable code, we simply can't enforce ours. We don't. And that would be a separate change that's beyond our scope. So let's see, Lorraine, do you have one more comment?
Yeah, but my understanding, and speaking with Rick Bravadaccia, I believe his name is, and I apologize, I'm probably messing it up, but I felt the city is enforcing code. I mean,
Through what mechanism?
Through the city. The city has a code enforcement.
Let's see. Let me turn it to
department.
Roz to address that specific issue.
And so
Here, hold on, Lorraine, just a second. Let me get Roz's input on that specific.
So the person you're talking about, Lorraine, is Rick or Dwayne Baravaccia, and he is head of neighborhood services, and code enforcement is in his shop. And generally speaking, not generally, the code they enforce is the city municipal code. There are other things this board uses, like the design guidelines that the board developed about 6 or 7 years ago, to advise applicants of the kinds of things to think about, the criteria that you look for, what it means to be compatible with the historic district. That's different than the code, which has the force of law. The code we have now allows things that this board has not allowed, in my experience, like vinyl windows. The code allows that, but the board doesn't, which is a very confusing message to send to an applicant who looks up the code to figure out what they can and can't do, and then comes here and finds out there's different information.
So let's see, let me switch back to Willie.
There's not a conflict. What happens in codes, it's what you have the national code, you have the local code, you could have the city code, and each are additional requirements. If the city, it's all incorporated as historic. If there was only a portion of the city that was historic and the rest was not historic, then the same obligations doesn't apply. So what it is that the code by the county dictates what it requires, and that applies to everybody. Takoma Park has additional requirements.
But I don't believe our code actually identifies much that's additional. If anything, it tends to leave open opportunities that are different.
It tells them what we're looking for.
But it does not, to Roz's point, it doesn't one-for-one reflect the way we discuss issues currently.
No, so what I'm saying is that there's for enforcement to happen on the county side, if we said, we're not approving a vinyl window, right? And it went to NCPC or the county, and they agreed with us. It says, no, you can't put in a vinyl. And the guy says, yeah, but I go to the county code and it says vinyl is allowed.
Our city code says vinyl is allowed.
Yeah, so it's fine, which means that if our code says it's allowed, what I'm basically saying is that it's an additional. It means the ultimate approval is the collection of what the person received the permit on. So if it was approved only that it's a wood window and the vinyl is not allowed, then that's what's approved and he puts in vinyl, then they have to rip it out.
So I'd like to bring the conversation back to what's, I guess, actionable at the moment. Roz, can I get clarity on what, so you let us know that it's going before the city. Is there another action that's required of us? We could discuss, do we want to point out concerns that we could pass along? My impression is that the city is the next step, but I'd like your explanation on that front.
So the code is set by city council.
Right.
That's the next step and final step. The city code is in the purview of the city council. I think it would be ill-advised if for staff to put forward code that the board doesn't agree on.
And just to refresh my memory, did we formally approve? I know we discussed and came to a pretty strong agreement on allowing the change. Does the city request a statement from us one way or the other? What's the logistics there?
The requirement is not for the board to approve it because it's council's purview.
Right.
I sought board support because I didn't want to go to council with something that the board didn't support.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And
seems
it's
like
appreciated.
Yeah, it seems like a waste of everyone's time and not tapping into the expertise that the board has. But the board, to my recollection, the board did not vote on it, but we had a number of discussions and seemed to come to consensus.
And it's not a matter that requires a vote for
Doesn't
any process.
require a
Okay.
vote.
Okay, let's see, Lorraine, and I'd like to not spend too much more time on this in that we have discussed this for a while, but let me turn back to you, Lorraine.
Thank
You're
you.
all set.
I just want to clarify one thing that was a little bit wrong that was said. In looking at our code, it says vinyl clad wood or metal or other weather resistant materials may be considered, but the HBC will make a note that, but not necessarily approved. And that is really true. So it does not allow vinyl clad wood or metal or other weather resistance. It may be considered. It's quite a different thing. In certain situations, they might approve that on a new addition, for example.
I don't think we need to discuss vinyl windows in particular right now because that's a very small part, but I would like...
I just wanted to correct that.
Okay,
Yeah.
and I appreciate that. I would like to focus on whether... I would like us to have a general consensus that we are comfortable with the change because I think it will facilitate cleaner conversations going forward. Our primary references would be to the county code and would be to our own design guidelines, which I believe is a document that if we felt like it needed a revision to provide further clarity, we could look at. So I guess I'd like to request that we focus our conversation there. So Willie, let me turn to you, and then Lorraine, if you have an additional comment, we'll go back to you as well. And Eric, let me know if you have any other thoughts.
No, so my only comment is that as long as the board says that we have the design guidelines, and if we render opinion on what it is and we make a statement and it comes into the minutes and into what we send to the Historic Preservation Committee, that in itself is a decision of the board. It's independent of any code. So we can, by the guidelines, determine is it in keeping. So I think the code, it only goes to enforcement. So we don't do enforcement. So I believe as long as we're held to, if the county holds to what this board approves and doesn't approve, I'm fine. So at least that's my position.
Okay. Any additional comments? Okay. Let me switch back over to you, Roz. All right.
Just to add that the code is not only used by enforcement, the code is used by applicants. And so I regularly get calls from people who are trying to make sense of it, who want to come before the board with something that's approvable, and they're trying to figure out what that means. And so it does create confusion beyond just the question of enforcement.
Yeah, no, that makes sense and lines up with, I think, some of our earlier conversations as well. Okay, so I think that unless there's any additional comments, I believe we're good on old business. So we can move on to new business, which includes the changes to some extent in our board practices, reviewing what the basics are that we've generally been doing, but also how we're adjusting to this new setting. and then the electric charging station. So we'll start with board practices. Let's see, Roz, do you want to sort of summarize?
I'm happy to start. Obviously, we're experiencing the changes, so we're seeing firsthand, and we're open to feedback. In front of you, you have a proposed schedule of monthly meetings. We have on your calendars bi-monthly meetings, but there have been enough times in the past where we're trying to pull together a meeting in between times that what I would like to propose is that we have on our calendars a monthly meeting, and then if there's not a project review, then we don't have the meeting. And we would know a week in advance. We've moved up the project review dates to a full week so that you will have in your hands the agenda and materials a week before. So I guess the board would need to decide if they want to do that.
I think the approach makes sense. I certainly think it's easier to have it scheduled than it is to scramble. And we've often been able to meet the quorum without a lot of notice, so I think it seems reasonable that we'd get there. Let me see, Willie, I will turn on yours in just a second. There we go.
No, I just guess I have to agree.
Okay.
That's it.
Great. Any concerns with switching to a every month, and then we'll take it off if...
Yeah, no,
Great.
I agree.
Okay. Oh, let's see. There you go. Sorry. Yeah, it adds a little delay.
It makes sense.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see, were there other parts of our changes, Roz, that you would like to discuss? Or does anyone have any comments yet sort of on this approach? Let's see. Eric.
About, and maybe I was wrong with the time, but it was like 10 of 6. All of a sudden, I was closing up the shop, and all of a sudden, boop, I'm on the computer screen, something about tonight's meeting, and then international time, and it listed a when. Excuse me, I ate chili for lunch. It was a screen that I had never seen before. It was reminding me of this meeting. The meeting is in like 40 minutes from now. And then it was today's date, Tuesday, and then there was a Wednesday date, and that was international time. And it was something that I was supposed to adjust in my calendar, but no one else got that?
I did not experience that, but this is the first time we've used Google Invite, so that may have triggered some.
Yeah, there you
let's
go.
See, hold on, Roz, let me.
It was a Google Calendar invite, and so it may be, you can change the settings on your own account to give you a reminder or skip the reminder or.
Yeah, there may be some auto setting if you didn't choose to have it tell you 40 minutes ahead. Huh? It may be how they're interfacing, but
All right.
but you made it here on time. It worked.
Well, cricket did that.
Yeah. So let's see. As we've gone through the agenda, talked briefly about public comments. We'll see how that goes. Alternates. Anything on that front? This is, I believe, a reference to the historic Takoma role, and just some clarity and reminder that it's one voting member and participatory member at a time. Any concern on that front, Lorraine? I'll turn over to you.
No, obviously, absolutely no concern about that at all. If Jim is at a meeting, he has to be a member of the public and be viewed as such.
Okay.
There's
No, I wasn't under the impression there was
question.
any conflict
there's
around
no
it.
There's absolutely
I think
no
just
question.
the formalizing this process
Sure.
shifts.
Yeah.
Highlights a bit more of the distinction. So
Yeah.
that's all. I mean, it was
Yeah.
just an acknowledgement that was
Yeah,
the
no,
dynamic and would be a
no.
bit of a change, just spatially, if nothing else.
Yeah, it's kind of a spatial change. It's fine.
Okay.
I mean, he very well may be coming to certain meetings to speak
Great.
because he's been involved with the board for so long. So,
Certainly.
yeah.
Okay,
No problem.
great. Let's see, we talked about the monthly schedule, and then retroactive reviews. So this came up in the context of the fence, which had all kinds of issues involved around it. But one that I think put us in a tricky position was that we were starting from a place where the work had already been done. I think we're try our best to accommodate and facilitate reasonable work, but I think that was one where it highlighted the trickiness of approving things after the fact. And I think in reality, we don't have to do that, and that doesn't mean that they won't get their permit in the end, but I think we could discuss, do we want to, and it doesn't have to be an official policy, but make that our norm, that unless there's an exception where we feel otherwise, that we will try to err on the side of not approving retroactively, let's say in Roz.
Just to clarify that for the Historic Preservation Commission, I can draft a letter that says the board chooses not to weigh in on an application. Ordinarily, I draft a letter that says we've reviewed it and here's the finding, but I can.
Right, so we would still have the process of submitting some kind of weigh-in or some kind of comment to the county. We wouldn't be waiving that.
Or just saying to the county, we're not weighing in which case the application can move forward.
Yes, let's say Lorraine, hold on. Oh, hold on just a sec, sorry. There we go.
Yeah, I agree that the retroactive permits are a problem, and I've debated in my head how should we handle it, just avoid reviewing them. Or if there was time to review it, we would need to be sure that we as a board would go and inspect the work, because once something is built, I mean, we're not looking at it in the abstract anymore, and the big disadvantage is to not having time to go and see it. And many times these retroactive permits come up in the last minute because they're scrambling to go before the HPC. And so in a case like that, where we do not have time to go out and actually review the work that has been done, I think we need to not comment on it. If there is time to go out, we may wish to go out and physically all of us go and look at it and see if we have any issues, but that's a big deal.
Right.
You know?
Here, let's see, let me switch back to Roz. Okay.
So if you get the information a week in advance, is that enough time, or would you want more than that?
I guess I would say I think it's gonna, for me, it would personally vary getting out onto
Right.
a site, particularly say in the winter. I have a limited number of hours in the daylight that I could actually be here. I don't think that we should require any kind of different timeline, but I think we should ask to be notified if we have a retroactive permit, but lean on the side unless there's a real exception where we're really able to make it work of not hearing it. Let's see. Does anyone else have any concerns on that front or thoughts? Okay, so it doesn't change anything in terms of our information. It just may give us a sort of starting point for how to handle those cases as they come up. Here, hold on. Let me switch. Eric was first, and then I'll turn to you, Lorraine.
I got a question about the term retroactive permit.
Yes.
You either get a permit or you don't get a permit.
So it's
You
a
don't-
permit for work that's already been done. So it shouldn't.
You
I mean,
can't-
it's already out of sync.
Yeah.
Right. So that's where I
I
think
can't
we
build my
kinda-
kitchen and then ask the guy
Exactly.
to come. Yeah.
And yet.
It was done, right.
So
Well,
I think that does kind
it
of
was-
remove us from a circumstance.
And I don't know,
that's-
and it's not up to us to slap hands. And Roz, when you were saying, well, then we can just put in a thing that says, we don't have an opinion on that. So then what happens? So then the county rules, yay or
Let's
nay?
see. Let me switch to Roz to answer that, and then Lorraine, I'll
All right.
switch to you. Okay?
Yeah, so the Facade Advisory Board review is one aspect of the application to the county. And so we can do a review letter that says we're not interested in reviewing this, for whatever reason. We don't have a quorum, or it's a retroactive, or any number of reasons. Then the county will move forward with the application as they see fit.
Well, and why don't we plan on, when the first one comes up next, we can talk about how we want that letter phrased, hopefully come to something that becomes our sort of standard, but we can frame it. I think there's a degree to which saying we're choosing not to weigh in maybe does sound like an approval, so we could be framed as, you know, something about the service of this board is no longer really functioning when it's in this circumstance. You know, we don't need to figure it all out now, but let's say, Lorraine, you'd been waiting, and then Eric, if you would like to add a comment, I'll come back to you.
Yeah, there was, they happen in various ways. I don't know if we should be a little flexible as to what we decide to do given a certain situation, but there was one situation where there was a storefront that was being dismantled and without a historic area work permit, and I received many calls from people actually in the neighborhood. I had 3 or 4 people calling saying, do you know what's going on here? It was Mad Fitness was getting pulled out. Anyway, there was a stop work order put on it because it needed a historic area work permit, and so the applicant came in and discussed with us his plans to actually do proper framing, which we liked and we approved.
Right. So, and I think there's no proposal to say we're just going to stamp everything. And I do think that becomes even its own exception because yes, it's retroactive, but it hasn't been completed. So that opportunity where our comment can actually accomplish something is still there. And I think that's the distinction that I see as a real problem.
So to be flexible, in other words.
No, I don't see any reason why we wouldn't continue to weigh in. I think it just may help us. And
may
maybe these won't come up
decide.
much, fingers crossed. But I think we had sort of a slew of them.
But we could also decide, look, too short a time, we're not doing
I think our tendency is to try to be accommodating, which I think is generally a valuable approach given our role. But I think that was one where I felt like we were put in a position that was uncomfortable. And hopefully we won't have a similar situation, but I wouldn't be surprised if at some point we do. Okay, so I think that covers the board practices. The last thing we've got is the electric charging station, which I know, Willie, you had some thoughts on, so I'll turn it over to you. Oh, hold on. Let me start with Roz first, and then we'll... Okay, Roz?
I have a letter to distribute from the city manager to the board regarding this, so I'll just do it now.
Okay. Let's see. And we can reject. Willie, do you want to say anything first, or we can take a look at the letter? Let me switch over to you.
So the city came before us on planting bed guards.
Right.
And planting bed guards. Tway, in our opinion, is it in keeping, again, with the character of the historic nature of Takoma Park? We rendered an opinion, and I haven't seen gone in, but we did. And then I see this, and I'm wondering why, I guess the letter will tell us who approved this, who owns it, who's operating this. And it's going to be very difficult for the board. From, let's say, the Italian place. He was wanting a sign approval. Right. And we were really critical, and he finally gets his, and he was pretty upset, but he got what he wanted, and he's a great business, but he did what he was obligated to do. And now this goes right next to his place of business. And then I'm sitting there going, what is the board doing?
Well, so what is our purpose? If they put this up, I say, well, how can we then go to another person who wants a sign? And so I'm sorry, you can't do your sign because
Why don't we take a look at this letter? Because just from my skimming, it sounds like there's a recognition that there was a problem in the process. And I think the process is what you're speaking to now, Willie, that it's is there a double standard? How does that look? And I appreciate that. So why don't we just take a minute or two to skim through this and see if we have concerns based on how it's framed here.
Well, the first problem I have is the demand for electrical vehicles at charging stations has grown significantly in Takoma Park. So the biggest my concern is, does this mean that every other parking space
Okay,
is
but
going
I'd
to
like
get this
to,
thing?
before you go on, I would just like to, why don't you finish the letter? I think in the next paragraph, it addresses the issues with how this first one was carried out. And I'd myself like to make sure I'm reading clearly what sort of the assessment is of how that happened and how things, I assume our main concern is how things happen going forward in light of that installation. So I think my concern with this is that it doesn't, like I don't leave reading this with a clear sense of what sort of there's a reference to not overlooking processes in the future. So I guess I'd like just a clarification. Is this the kind of thing that will typically be brought before us. My impression of the planting was that it was something of a courtesy and that it was not officially a facade, but I think it does make sense that it would be interpreted as part of the larger area. And I think similar to your point about perception.
I think we should send something back in response to this letter and say that if this became in front of the board, we would not approve it, period.
I think that's jumping to conclusions without us actually discussing it, but I think we could, I would be comfortable, and I don't know that we need to write something formally, but making sure that we're conveying that we would like to be included in conversations before these things are installed. And that kind of lines up with the general process. Let me switch to Roz, and then Willie, if you have another comment, I can come back to you.
Just to clarify the process, this will come before the committee and it will go to HPC.
This specific one?
I think they'll end up doing a retroactive.
Oh, that's kind of unfortunate based on our last conversation. I mean, I think in which case, like, that could be, if it's, so it will come before us, so there'll be a separate formal review. So then let's table concerns since it will come before us. I guess we can, at this point, say we would like to see either this or a proposal of future processes. And we can, that'll give us a chance to test out our retroactive concern and hopefully hear some more about if this is the start of a series, kind of how that process can be handled. All right. Any other concerns on that? Let's see, Lorraine, let me turn yours on. Okay, there you go.
Yeah, I just, in getting things like this, Roz, I hate having to read them at the meeting. It's so much better to get them ahead of time, rather than, because then you can really study it and focus on it.
Okay, let me switch to Roz quickly just on that front, and then I can get back to you, Lorraine.
Just to say, it was only given to me at about 6 o'clock, so I know she was aiming to get it to the board tonight, knowing it was meeting and wanting to have some response.
So let's say that in that we anticipate seeing a proposal of this or whatever, or a review of this in the future, that we again request the week turnaround for the next one. Because I agree with you, it is a challenge to review something on the spot. I think because we're not reviewing it for any kind of approval, it's a little bit of an outlier, but certainly anything for approval should go back into that week. So Willie, I'll turn to you, and then Eric after that.
Just a quick question. Why did we get this letter from them? How did this come about?
I don't know all of the specifics, but I know that there was pushback from various people, residents, businesses, about the installation.
Okay, let's see. Eric.
Things I don't understand when they're saying, no, I'm not an electric car driver yet. The only other DC fast charger, I don't know the difference between a fast charger and not, although obviously it's the time factor, is located behind the community center. There's been there's a charging station right across from the co-op in that little B.Y. Morrison, a waste of time. But anyway, that place there, and there's always been, I think, 3 spaces, mostly used by cabs because there's a lot of electric cabs around, and they were always free. Well, my neighbor, Dolly at RS Automotive, called me over Christmas and said, Eric, would you mind me putting up a sign on the wall of your building because I'm putting a charging station in? Dolly, you're my neighbor. You can do whatever you want. I mean, I didn't even think for a moment that Fab would have anything to do with it. But I went, but Dolly, why are you doing that? Because right across the street, he says, well, they're not free anymore. And if some people are going to be charging for charging, I might as well put that in as another incentive for me. Okay, so he installed the charging station, and there's a charge for it, obviously. I don't know if this one that we're seeing on the screen you pay for, because when they first started up, even on highways, you could pull off to the rest stop and you could charge your car for free because they were trying to induce people to get electric vehicles. So, of course, I'd have a question of who funded putting this in, where's the money coming from, who's making a dollar on it. The fact that it looks like, boy, it could have been nicer designed than that. I mean, it looks old and withered, just sitting there as it is. But there's a lot of inconsistencies in all of this. So, and if I had a vehicle I wouldn't want to go down to right on Carroll Avenue, right there, and sit there and charge my car. It, to me, is not a convenient spot to do it.
So maybe we could ask that, since I don't quite know what's going to be brought before us, it sounds like some context would help. Like, what's
Yeah.
the larger city strategy?
Right.
Are there other locations planned? How it relates to charging stations? Charging stations are not something I'm particularly familiar with, so a little bit of context. Obviously, I assume we'll get something specific to this one, but just some context on the range of models, how they work within an urban context, that
Yeah.
kind of thing, I think
Yeah.
could help inform our decision. And Willie, let me switch to you.
I would caution going down that road, because right now, this is charging a vehicle. I mean, it still pollutes. This electricity comes
Could
from.
I ask that we have the conversation about it when we talk about the review? Because we're talking about an issue that we don't have all the facts on right now.
What I'm saying is, don't ask for the bigger picture. Like, that's going to sway the decision one way or the other on their big goal and how they're implementing these stations throughout Takoma Park.
I think it would be helpful
No, I don't
to
think
have
it'd be helpful at all.
context. It doesn't
No.
have to be
No,
part
it
of the
doesn't.
proposal.
I don't think we should
where-
ask that. Not at all, because it's no.
Well, I, as a member, would like to have that context. If they provide it, great. If they don't, not. It doesn't have. I do not think that we need to be approving some sort of larger plan. I don't think that falls within our scope. I think we should see what the specific proposal is. But it sounds like Eric had some questions about how it fits into the larger city approach. It doesn't have to be part of the official approval, but I think it could help with our understanding of how this single station fits in. It may give us a preview of what's coming so we can have some conversations earlier rather than later, which may improve the outcome. All right, anything else before we adjourn? Lorraine. Oh, hold on just a sec. There we go.
Quick question for Roz. Do you know when it's going before the HPC? Oh, okay.
But I assume we'll find out, like you'll send us an email with an update on our next agenda. We'll assume it's on there until you tell us otherwise.
Have a retroactive permit.
I know. Well, right, and that we'll have a couple issues to tease out on that front. So, certainly no, and I think that's right. It's a different context, but I think also though finishing out our conversation about retroactive permits should be part of it. Okay. Anything else? We're all set. Roz, let's see.
Just
Yes.
one note about if board members have agenda items that, because I'm trying to get the agenda out at least a week ahead of time. If you have something you want that's not old business or a review, then it'll go under new business. But please let me know so I can get it on.
Great.
You can also bring up something that's not on the agenda under new business. So if you walk in with something in mind or we miss the agenda, but it'd be great to get that information ahead of time.
Great. All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.